Our next speaker is Chen Ben Asher, is a clinician, public speaker, educator, and author of the Amazon bestseller, What If Gluten-Free Is Not Enough? So you can get it on Amazon. I believe you can, there's copies here too that you can get, okay. She's a leading authority on weight management, women's health, and food sensitivity. Her clinic is in Silicon Valley, where she provides a holistic functional nutrition approach by looking for the root causes and body system imbalances. She uses cutting-edge lab testing and designs the nutritional program to your specific needs as an individual. Food, supplements, and lifestyle changes are part of the Gain Health, Lose Weight program that will be integrated to bring balance. Please welcome Chen.
So I hope you're not too tired, because it's too late, and I never done a talk at 9 o'clock in the evening, so I'm very excited. Hopefully I'll sleep tonight well too, and I hope between now and 10 o'clock you'll be awake. Promise me that. So I'm Chen Ben Asher, and I'm board certified nutritionist, and I did put this book, What If Gluten-Free Is Not Enough? Surprisingly, I am a gluten-free person, and it didn't work for me. So I started investigating, and I tried to kind of like look and learn why, regardless to my efforts to take off the gluten out of my diet, I'm still not doing as I wish for myself. And the next question for you here is, how many people you know are gluten-free? At least one, right? And I don't know if you yourself are gluten-free, but being gluten-free is not an easy game. Anyway, we're looking at that. It requires a lot of effort. It's huge lifestyle changes. It's challenging anywhere we go, anywhere we eat, and it's not a fun thing to go over. So why so many people are using gluten-free diet, and in what way we're missing the boat, and that was the reason why I put the book. So why people are using gluten-free diet, and that's very important to look at that, because you'll see many reasons, but only, I got that, only 6% are truly allergic, and 11% are truly gluten sensitive. So all the rest of us are doing gluten-free diet with no good reason, and I'm putting that in my book. If you don't have to be on gluten-free diet, why are you? And that's a big question, and that's why I'm doing that. Oops, why that goes that far? So is it a dietary trend? How come 3 million people become, in the US alone, gluten-free? And as I said before, it is require education, it's a lifelong effort. When we are on gluten-free diet, we will see some relief on symptoms in most cases. And if we're doing that for weight loss, mainly, we will lose some weight, but not maintain that. And then we'll regain the weight again, and I'll explain that later. It's expensive. It's not easy to be on gluten-free, and it's not cheap. And 23% of gluten-free consumers will say that they will incorporate that partially, meaning we'll do gluten-free, but then we go to a restaurant, right? And we'll eat gluten food. Or we think we eat gluten-free, but suddenly we get a reaction and we are not so sure. And more than anything else, people will cheat. And that's the big thing that we are facing as practitioners and clinicians, where our patients or clients are cheating and how that affects their health. More interesting, 37% of our consumers that are eating gluten-free will say that they will buy it because they think it's healthy. 60% will claim that gluten is bad for us, but they know that gluten-free is good for them, right? So it's a perception that the marketers did very well, and they are influencing us. 67% more consumers are eating gluten-free these days than 3 years ago, which is phenomena. If everywhere you go, there is gluten-free something, including apples and broccoli. 20, yeah, that's the thing. And 23 of consumers are beginning to view gluten-free food as one of their contributor factors of overall well-being and weight loss. And that's why I started doing that, because every lady that I worked or knocked at my door, she already done or he done, they already had been gluten-free. They did lose weight, but they didn't cap the weight, the new weight, and they regain it plus. So what's going on? And of course, the sales share is just growing and growing, and this is the number one niche in the food industry that's growing that fast compared to any other product. So what is gluten? It's very important. Gluten is the protein particle in wheat, and we all know that. It's the rubbery elastic substance that gives the structure of wheat product. So if you have tried to bake any gluten-free product, most likely it broke for you, right? It's very fragile, it's become very powdery, it does not stay long, right? How the industry does that, how they prolong the life shelf of the gluten product, and how they make those end product stay nice and beautiful. What starches, what other grains they are using that mimicking our health. And that's the whole book. So one of the, I will give that answers while we're going. So the most important thing when we're looking at the structure of gluten is that light. So the wheat protein breaks down into 3 major proteins. We have the albumin, we have the globulin, and we have gluten, okay? But gluten breaks down into 2 components. And we all know about gliadin because that's what our doctors will measure. That's what our doctor will try to find if we have celiac. But we could be easily also allergic to glutenin or sensitive to glutenin. So, and most of us, 50% of the population and even more, are coming negative on gliadin. But we could be easily sensitive or allergic to the glutenin part of gluten. But at the same token, we could be sensitive to albumin, and we could be sensitive to globulin, and we could be a combination of all. And that's what I see, many people. But also gliadin breaks down into alpha, beta, gamma, and omega, and I will tell you in a few minutes again that most of us, when we go to the doctor office and they're checking our gliadin markers, they will check only the the 33-mer alpha gliadin. And if you come negative on the alpha 33-mer, now you're not celiac. But what if you're sensitive on the beta or the gamma or the omega or any other combination? What that makes us? Are we allowed to eat gluten? Is it okay for us to do that? Are we challenging our immune system? Is that what make us, in a couple of years, suffering from pain that needs CBD, or autoimmune, or neurological challenges? That's what we need to look at, and that's why I put this book. And I need to drink, sorry. So the most important thing, and I think that's what happened in the last 2 to 3 years, it's clearly studied that gluten breaks into 2 particles, and if in the past we thought only on the gliadin protein as a challenge substance or peptide on our immune system, it's clearly known right now that it's not stand alone. And we have to look at both, and there are more people that are prone to both of these peptides than ever before. And that's most of the challenges we are seeing as a practitioners. So why are we choosing or adopting gluten-free diet? So I kind of like thought of two pathways. The first one is medical reasons, which is 70%, as I showed you before. But then 30% thinking that it's healthier, and 23% thinking that will faster weight loss. They will be able to lose weight faster. So if you look at the numbers, you can see that almost 53% of the population will choose gluten-free not because of medical reasons. And this is the paradox. Okay? So where are we? And how do we define where we are? I hope I did well. So when we look at the medical reasons, we have three medical reasons: celiac, wheat allergy, and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And let's understand clearly what's the difference between the three subgroups and how that justify your actions to be on gluten-free diet or not, because that's the most important thing. So celiac disease is absolutely chronic systemic immune-mediated disorder that triggered by the exposure of gluten, meaning you eat bread, there is this peptide, and your immune system will respond. Mainly, we'll get the autoimmune on the digestive tract, and we will see some damage on the small intestine, on the villi, which will reduce automatically our ability to digest food, absorb food, and produce nutrients. And now we become depleted. And that's one of the reasons why I titled the book, What If Gluten-Free is Not Enough? Because you're pulling off the gluten maybe, but if you're depleted nutritionally, you have to close the gap. Otherwise, you're prone to more diseases and challenges. People are in celiac disease will react to the gliadin peptide. So it's only one fraction of the larger peptide gluten, which breaks down, you already know, into two small fractions, the gliadin and the glutenin. But celiac people will react only to the gliadin. More important is, and that's something that it's important to understand, in my opinion at least, that if you have one family member that is diagnosed with celiac, then most likely there are other relatives in the family that are having some type of the same level of disease. And you have to search for these individuals. It could be your child, it could be your grandchild, it could be the niece or the cousin, but you have to look internally because it is genetic, and you have to make sure that you discover that. So if it's first degree or second degree, this is the ratio between first degree and second degree. But it's important to diagnose and look for those individuals, because when you are waving off the trigger, which is the gliadin, you are reducing the risk for future autoimmune condition. And that's very important. And this is kind of like a very busy slide, but we want to prevent the autoimmune disease that comes along with this presentation. So autoimmune diseases are like thyroid, infertility, IBS, IBD, colitis, Crohn, cancer, RA, bone loss, neurological damage, diabetic. Those are real diseases. Those are real people that are suffering. Those are real people that could prevent their diseases if they had been diagnosed correctly and follow the diet completely, not just whenever they want. And that's the truth. And that's why I'm screaming right now and kind of like spreading the word. Wheat allergy. Very confusing, very important. And I am the person who had been diagnosed with celiac, but I'm also wheat allergy. And this is very important to understand. Wheat allergy is where we are reacting to the proteins completely, the whole three proteins and all the breakdown of the proteins in wheat. not just the gliadin that is specifically related to celiac disease, okay? It requires tests. You cannot guess it. You have to test it. And we usually test it by looking at the antibodies IgA, and it needs to be above 50%. We mentioned before the ELISA, but there are other methods to do that. But you want to make sure that you definitely want to make sure you are not allergic to wheat parallel to gliadin. You definitely want to do that. And if we have here any medical doctor, please do that. Please measure that, because we are missing so many potential autoimmune disease prevention, and we need to do that. So the possible symptoms are itchy, watery eyes, breathing difficulties, hive, rashes, swelling, headaches, cramps, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Sounds familiar? Do you know anyone who's going through it? At least one person. And they diagnose negative as celiac. But they could be absolutely positive on the wheat family allergy. So what grain belonged to the wheat family? Very surprising. Oop, I'm going back here. Rice. Rice, oat, millet, teff, barley, sorghum, sugarcane, corn, bamboo. Look at that. Almost every gluten-free product have millet or teff or sorghum. So now you think you're celiac and you eat gluten-free product with rice, and you are also wheat allergy, and now you're getting antibodies and you're not healing. And that's the paradox, because most of our gluten-free products made by this grain. They're cheap. They're massive growing everywhere. And it's a paradox, because you see people that took off the gluten out of their diet and they're not recovering. They kept getting sicker and sicker. And now, not just that they're celiac, now they have RA, now they have diabetic, now they have cancer. What's the point? Check it. And we have to look at that. So if your patients say, I'm not feeling well, even though I did take off the wheat or the gliadin, check for wheat family. And you can do that easily by checking their monocytes, their eosinophils, the neutrophils that are either rising up or not. They should rise up. Macrophages are, produced in massively in order to take all this inflammatory responding. So we need to pay attention to that, and that's by eating gluten-free products, right? And non-celiac gluten sensitive, those are those individuals who came negative on the IgE, and they came negative on the gliadin, but they feel miraculously better when they take off gluten out of their diet. How that happened? So my assumptions are two. A, they probably are not fully producing antibodies that had been looked for. They may produce different antibodies that needs to be checked, and I'll explain that. And second, in my opinion, is we're eating too much grain overall. So when we're pulling off partially, even if it's gluten-free, then immediately we feel better. Our blood sugar goes down. Inflammatory responding going down. But still, we have to check what's going on. Can they have teff or not? Can they have rice or not? And that's the journey most people are going with me. Gluten and autoimmunity. Yes, 50 million people in the US are affected by autoimmune disease. 12 million are affected by cancer. Those are real people. 30 million are affected by heart disease. And we know that there are in between 80 to 100 different diseases that are related to this phenomena, and we definitely need to make sure that we are reducing those numbers. And those are the people that we love, and those are the people that we care for, and those people are suffer. There is no doubt, and they're not just seniors, and they're not just adults, they're also kids and animals. Animals are suffer from gluten too. Absolutely. And autoimmune diseases are one of 10 leading causes of death for girls and women in all age groups, which is amazing. Why don't we do more? Why don't we improve? Why don't we change the way we're measuring the cause of those immune responses? Oop, how did I go that far? Okay, I'll keep going. So gluten is not the only one protein in wheat family. We got that, right? So now let's understand a little bit better what's going on with the grain itself. So the wheat flour breaks down into starches, proteins, moistures, and lipids. We know that 90% of the protein, which is only between 10 to 50%, is gluten. And gluten divided 50% to gliadin and 50% to glutenin. But we measure only this fraction. Okay? Now, I told you already that the gliadin breaks down into alpha, beta, gamma, and omega and gamma, right? Now, when we do have those different, when we are measuring, when we are producing those gliadin, immediately what will happen, antibodies will be produced. And they will affect us in different areas of the body. We can produce antibodies, myelin antibodies, which affect the brain, the cerebellum, the partial, the isolate, the thyroid, the insulinic factor, and the diabetic type 1. So those are the direct correlation between what we eat, how our body produced antibodies, and how that leads to our diseases. And that's only start with a bite of a slice of a bread, if we're prone to eat. But if we are prone to eat, and we are producing those antibodies, why are we cheating? Why are we not taking that seriously? Why, when we go outside to a restaurant, we will close our eyes and we'll eat, I'm sorry, I'm using it, soy. And when we are buying gluten-free product, do we see what's written there? And I'm always saying that also, I cannot have wheat. I cannot have rice and millet. I cannot have gliadin, but I'm also sensitive to olive oil. And it could be that too. Many of us, when we are prone to some of the foods, it's not just the grains. It could be any other substance that trigger the immune system. And I was shocked to find out that I cannot have olive oil. But when I'm having olive oil, I'm reacting worse than wheat. I will end up in the hospital on olive oil. I will get diarrhea if I'll eat rice or wheat. Big different response. So why do I bring it? Because antibodies will be produced and they will attack. And each one of us is different. And we have to listen to our body, and we have to listen to our patients and our clients so we will be able to identify what pathway the food trigger. And when we know where it trigger and what food trigger, we can start the healing. Because what's the point to take off wheat and then eat rice or olive oil or tomatoes or meat? Going back to this lady in the back question. Now, there are other proteins that it's important to pay attention. There are people that are having hard time to take off gluten out of their diet. They have the opioid peptide response. They cannot stop eating wheat. Doesn't matter what we'll say to them, right? So when I'm working with a person like that, I will substitute first the wheat, if it's found that they're sensitive, with other grains. They have to move into kind of like a transition time to take off that need. Their brain relying on these peptides. And they cannot withdraw the bread cold cut, turkey. They can't do that. And there are those individuals that are addicted to the bread, and they will that will manifestate in their brain as a schizophrenia or bipolar or epilepsy. And I had a 3-year-old baby who got into episode of epilepsy, no brain damage that related to that presentation. And we found out that he's allergic to wheat and gluten, took it off. So far, no episodes. It could happen, but we have to look for that links. People that are sensitive to the omega-5 gliadin will get that wheat-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis reaction. So those are the people who will eat bread, and then will exercise, and they won't be able to breathe. But at the same time, they can get hives, or I think I don't know how to say that probably, but it's conish, edema, and shock, and those are the presentation. How many people comes to you with this kind of presentation? And they are coming. And that's due to the omega-5 gliadin, not the alpha 33 mer, which we all testing. And that's the key here to understand, because we are producing more antibodies in different pathways. And going there is the immune reaction. You're probably familiar with that. So the acute response is that pathway. So any food we eat will create some type of mapping of our immune system. And the immune system will respond, if it's acute, on the IgE antibodies. And IgG is the delayed response, which obviously happens 72 hours after the food was exposed into our body, as opposed to the acute response that happened in less than 3 hours. So you're not here. If you're here, you hear it. If you're here and you had a bread in less than 3 hours, you're either in the bathroom, or you cannot breathe, or you get rushed, or you rush to the hospital. Something happened. You cannot ignore that. But most of us are falling into the delayed response, which happens 72 hours after the food was exposed. And most of us will produce IgG antibodies. That is the second antibodies that the body will produce in higher volume. This is like about 90% on delayed response that we'll see presented when we are sensitive. So when you are producing IgE against gliadin, then you're celiac. But if you are IgG, now you become sensitive. But the body will produce and can produce IgA and IgM and T cells and immune complex antibodies. So it's not just like looking at one test that measure the 33 alpha gliadin. We need to look at you holistically. We need to make sure that we are paying the dollar amount if needed in order to make sure that you don't get all that antibodies that will trigger over time inflammation, infection, and autoimmune disease. That's the pathway. Not to say that we're not measuring antibodies in a holistic overview, and we're looking only at the gliadin to check if the person is celiac or not. But what if you are sensitive to gliadin, which is a peptide in the wheat grain, but also you're sensitive to olive oil like me? So I took the grain, but I'm still eating olive oil. Do you think I'm getting better? No way, I will. And that's basically the challenge. And Dr. Fasano even claiming that we are having higher challenge because right now we can measure maybe food sensitivity to tomatoes, but we don't know to measure cooked tomatoes. And we don't know yet to measure a combination. So you can eat tomato and you can eat cucumbers, no immune reaction, but when you make it as a salad, you could. I'm not going that deep and that far, but that's where the science goes. That's where we're looking for, and we try to see we're trying to figure out the best we can to support. We already know that there are 6 foods like eggs, dairy, wheat, shrimps, and soy and corn, that there are the 6, the most, the higher sensitivity we'll find in the larger population. So we're trying to figure out if there are other combinations or other foods that create the same response. But don't ignore that. The point here for me to say is if you found out that you're sensitive and your body is not reacting in the higher performance you should to your age, you have to look for other things. So the question that was before, I've been told to eat meat, true, but is it because you're not digesting, or is it because the protein itself, like the chicken or the lamb or the fish, you cannot digest? And we definitely can see that on our test, that there are people that cannot digest clearly proteins and fats. And then the food choices that comes along with that. Is it the beans? Is it the fish? You know, a lot of questions. So why do I bring that? Because we need to make sure that you are looking at yourself and at your body presentation. And it needs to be personalized, in my opinion, more than anything else. So I don't know if you heard about the cross-reactive antibodies. So cross-reactive antibodies are basically our immune system will produce antibodies against the chemical structure of the food. So if you are allergic to the gliadin, most likely the body will react to milk. And casein is one protein in dairy. So if you are sensitive to gliadin, the immune system will react the same way and attack and produce antibodies to the casein, but also to the rice protein. Now, most of our protein powders, the vegetarians, are made by and that's what I see. A lot of people, only by taking, for some people, the rice protein, they make so much better improvement. So you have to know your body, and you have to understand how your body reacts in order to make sure that you're not leading yourself to autoimmune disease, because it will go that way. So we want to control the systemic inflammatory response, and we definitely don't want to go to a very high pain level that requires further intervention. And the systemic inflammation will be on the mucosal barrier, including our intestinal, the spleen, the liver, and the ability of our body to produce ATP molecule, which is the energy molecule. Now, the key here about the reduced ATP, there is no way for our body to heal if we are not capable to produce ATP molecule. So that's the correlation between the mitochondrial as a powerhouse to generate as much as possible and efficiently the ATP molecule. Because if you don't do that, then there is no way to recover. And that's the other thing that comes along with food sensitivity or food allergy. In most of us, there will be a tissue damage in the gut, and especially in the villi area. And if you're celiac, that's the presentation. That's how it looks like. So it's more inflamed, it's more rigid, less flexibility. But the bottom line here, pulling off the food that trigger the changes will not heal the intestinal. And that's what I see. A lot of people will get bloating and gases, and maybe they will see mucus in their bowel movement, and they may even see food gets and leaks out of their feces, and they will see that. And they will take off the gluten out of their diet. They will see some improvement, but in the intestinal villi, they will not see healing. And that's what we're looking for. We are looking, this is the villi, this is the brush border that we talked about. But the point here is when the doors are getting open and food leaks out and gut bacteria leaks out and we get inflammation, then there is also tissue damage. And we cannot ignore the tissue damage, and we have to heal that area, because if we don't, then how would we absorb nutrients? How would we produce nutrients? And not to say, when food leaks out and gut bacteria leaks out, now there is more challenge on the immune system, because those particles are leaking into the blood. And that challenge even further our immune system to the point we get autoimmune disease, and pain is one of the signals of autoimmune disease or excess of inflammation. And then we get changes on the gut microbiome. I have 1 minute. Oh, yay. So, so one more minute to say. So the changes on the gut microbiome, and that's what we see much more than ever before. People with H. pylori and Candida and Lyme and Klebsiella and Epstein-Barr virus and biofilm issue, we see them. I see them almost on every client that I work with, and it all starts with the ability of our immune system to balance and our food that trigger the whole system. And obviously nutrients deficiencies. Nutrients deficiencies, big time. Most people that are prone to any of the food sensitivity or allergy will find themselves low on B12, folate, calcium, vitamin A, D, E, K, zinc, and iron. And you definitely don't want to ignore that. Because if you do ignore that, then you are leading yourself to further complications. We need food. How do we read labels? So the FDA set a gluten limit of less than 20 parts per million in food that carry label gluten-free. But the fact here is that if you are having oat that is gluten-free, which there is no such a thing, you have to know that probably there is less than 20 parts per million to put the label. But if you are wheat allergy and you eat oat, hallelujah, you are reacting. There is no way around. And obviously, don't go foolish. Apples and broccoli are not gluten-free by definition. There are a lot of labels on like broccoli and like there are a lot of foods that are giving them gluten-free label, but they are not relevant. There is like vegetables, dry vegetable that they have gluten-free dry vegetables, or or nuts and seeds gluten-free. Everywhere you go, it's gluten-free. No, you have to make sense to the gluten-free. What does it mean? It could be dried vegetables, but then did they sprinkle flour in it? Did they sprinkle corn powder in it? That's what you need to ask and not be foolish. You have to read the label and know perfectly your body in order to choose the right products and protect yourself so you're not challenging your immune system and your body.
Yep, unfortunately, we have to be out of here by 10 o'clock. So.
Perfectly. So I told you we'll do it quickly.
Yeah.
Here we are. Questions?
Okay. Is there questions? I think we could take maybe one question at the most. No questions? Okay.
Well, you can also continue a conversation outside
Sure.
the door as you're cleaning up or close to the door.
So this is kind of anecdotal, but I hear people say they go to Europe and they can eat the croissants in France or whatever, and they're wheat sensitive here, but they go there and they're not wheat sensitive. Can you say anything about that?
I hear it all the time, and yes, I would say that the grass wheat can be different. Number one, but I think it's illusion because they don't measure their antibody production. I don't think that's truly the case. If you are if you're allergic to gluten and to the wheat family, it will be applied anywhere in the world. It's either you are or not.
Make it quick.
Thank you very much. And
Okay, so
thank you
yes,
very much.
thank you.